Chapter 6 of the Dain Curse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 The Man from Devil's Island. After some delay, I had to ring twice. The Leggett's door was opened by Owen Fitzstephen. There was no sleepiness in his eyes. They were hot and bright, as they were when he found life interesting. Knowing the sort of things that interested him, I wondered what had happened. "What have you been doing?" he asked, looking at her clothes, at Collinson's bloody face, at the girl's scratched cheek. "Automobile accident," I said. "Nothing serious. Where's everybody?" "Everybody," he said, with peculiar emphasis on the word, "is up in the laboratory." And then to me, "Come here." I followed him across the reception hall to the foot of the stairs, leaving Collinson and the girl standing just inside the street door. Fitzstephen put his mouth close to my ear and whispered, "Leggett's committed suicide." I was more annoyed than surprised. I asked, "Where is he?" "In the laboratory. Mrs. Leggett and the police are up there. It happened only half an hour ago." "We'll all go up," I said. "Isn't it rather unnecessary?" he asked, "taking Gabrielle up there?" "Might be tough on her," I said irritably, "but it's necessary enough. Anyway, she's coked up and better able to stand the shock than she will be later when the stuff's dying out in her." I turned to Collinson. "Come on, we'll go up to the laboratory." I went ahead, letting Fitzstephen help Collinson with the girl. There were 6 people in the laboratory. A uniformed copper, a big man with a red mustache standing beside the door, Mrs. Leggett sitting on a wooden chair in the far end of the room, her body bent forward, her hands holding a handkerchief to her face, sobbing quietly, Ogar and Reddy standing by one of the windows, close together, their heads rubbing over a sheaf of papers that the detective sergeant held in his thick fists, a gray-faced dandified man in dark clothes standing beside the zinc table, twiddling eyeglasses on a black ribbon in his hand, and Edgar Leggett, seated on a chair at the table, his head and upper body resting on the table, his arms sprawled out. Ogar and Reddy looked up from their reading as I came in. Passing the table on my way to join them at the window, I saw blood, a small black automatic pistol lying close to one of Leggett's hands, and 7 unset diamonds grouped by his head. Ogar said, "Take a look," and handed me part of his sheaf of paper, 4 stiff white sheets covered with very small, precise and regular handwriting in black ink. I was getting interested in what was written there when Fitzstephen and Collinson came in with Gabrielle Leggett. Collinson looked at the dead man at the table. Collinson's face went white. He put his big body between the girl and her father. "Come in," I said. "This is no place for Miss Leggett now," he said hotly, turning to take her away. "We ought to have everybody in here," I told Ogar. He nodded his bullet head at the policeman. The policeman put a hand on Collinson's shoulder and said, "You'll have to come in, the both of you." Fitzstephen placed a chair by one of the end windows for the girl. She sat down and looked around the room, at the dead man, at Mrs. Leggett, at all of us, with eyes that were dull but no longer completely blank. Collinson stood beside her, glaring at me. Mrs. Leggett hadn't looked up from her handkerchief. I spoke to Ogar, clearly enough for the others to hear, "Let's read the letter out loud." He screwed up his eyes, hesitated, then thrust the rest of his sheaf at me, saying, "Fair enough, you read it." I read, "To the police. My name is Maurice Pierre de Mayenne. I was born in Fécamp, Department of Seine-Inférieure, France, on March 6, 1883, but was chiefly educated in England. In 1903 I went to Paris to study painting, and there, 4 years later, I made the acquaintance of Alice and Lily Dain, orphan daughters of a British naval officer. I married Lily the following year, and in 1909 our daughter Gabrielle was born. Shortly after my marriage, I had discovered that I had made a most horrible mistake, that it was Alice and not my wife Lily whom I really loved. I kept this discovery to myself until the child was past the most difficult baby years, that is, until she was nearly 5, and then told my wife, asking that she divorce me so I could marry Alice. She refused. On June 6, 1913, I murdered Lily and fled with Alice and Gabrielle to London, where I was soon arrested and returned to Paris, to be tried, found guilty, and sentenced to life imprisonment on the Isle de Selous. Alice, who had had no part in the murder, no knowledge of it until after it was done, and who had accompanied us to London only because of her love for Gabrielle, was also tried, but justly acquitted. All this is a matter of record in Paris. In 1918, I escaped from the islands with a fellow convict named Jacques Lebeau on a flimsy raft. I do not know, we never knew, how long we were adrift on the ocean, nor, toward the last, how long we went without food and water. Then Lebeau could stand no more and died. He died of starvation and exposure. I did not kill him. No living creature could have been feeble enough for me to have killed it, no matter what my desire. But when Lebeau was dead, there was enough food for one, and I lived to be washed ashore in the Gulf of Trieste. Calling myself Walter Martin, I secured employment with a British copper mining company at Aroa, and within a few months had become private secretary to Philip Howard, the resident manager. Shortly after this promotion, I was approached by a Cockney named John Edge, who outlined to me a plan by which we could defraud the company of £100 monthly. When I refused to take part in the fraud, Edge revealed his knowledge of my identity and threatened exposure unless I assisted him. That Venezuela had no extradition treaty with France might save me from being returned to the islands, Edge said, but that was not my chief danger. Lebeau's body had been cast ashore, undecomposed enough to show what had happened to him, and I, an escaped murderer, would be under the necessity of proving to a Venezuelan court that I had not killed Lebeau in Venezuelan waters to keep from starving. I still refused to join Edge in his fraud and prepared to go away. But while I was making my preparations, he killed Howard and looted the company's safe. He urged me to flee with him, arguing that I could not face the police investigation even if he did not expose me. That was true enough. I went with him. 2 months later in Mexico City, I learned why Edge had been so desirous of my company. He had a firm hold on me through his knowledge of my identity and a great and unjustified opinion of my ability, and he intended using me to commit crimes that were beyond his grasp. I was determined, no matter what happened, no matter what became necessary, never to return to the Isle de Selous. But neither did I intend becoming a professional criminal. I attempted to desert Edge in Mexico City. He found me, we fought, and I killed him. I killed him in self-defense. He struck me first. In 1920, I came to the United States, to San Francisco, changed my name once more to Edgar Leggett, and began making a new place for myself in the world, developing experiments with color that I had attempted as a young artist in Paris. In 1923, believing that Edgar Leggett could never now be connected with Maurice de Mayenne, I sent for Alice and Gabrielle, who were then living in New York, and Alice and I were married. But the past was not dead, and there was no unbridgeable chasm between Leggett and Mayenne. Alice, not hearing from me after my escape, not knowing what had happened to me, employed a private detective to find me, a Louis Upton. Upton sent a man named Ruppert to South America, and Ruppert succeeded in tracing me step by step from my landing in the Gulf of Trieste up to, but no farther than, my departure from Mexico City after Edge's death. In doing this, Ruppert, of course, learned of the deaths of Lebeau, Howard, and Edge. 3 deaths of which I was guiltless, but of which, or at least of one or more of which, I most certainly, my record being what it was, would be convicted if tried. I do not know how Upton found me in San Francisco. Possibly he traced Alice and Gabrielle to me. Late last Saturday night he called upon me and demanded money as the price of silence. Having no money available at the time, I put him off until Tuesday, when I gave him the diamonds as part payment. But I was desperate. I knew what being at Upton's mercy would mean, having experienced the same thing with Edge. I determined to kill him. I decided to pretend the diamonds had been stolen, and to so inform you, the police. Upton, I was confident, would thereupon immediately communicate with me. I would make an appointment with him and shoot him down in cold blood, confident that I would have no difficulty in arranging a story that would make me seem justified in having killed this known burglar, in whose possession, doubtless, the stolen diamonds would be found. I think the plan would have been successful. However, Rupert, pursuing Upton with a grudge of his own to settle, saved me from killing Upton by himself killing him. Rupert, the man who had traced my course from Devil's Island to Mexico City, had also, either from Upton or by spying on Upton, learned that Mayenne was legate, and, with the police after him for Upton's murder, he came here demanding that I shelter him, returning the diamonds, claiming money in their stead. I killed him. His body is in the cellar. Out front, a detective is watching my house. Other detectives are busy elsewhere inquiring into my affairs. I have not been able satisfactorily to explain certain of my actions, nor to avoid contradictions, and now that I am actually suspect, there is little chance of the past's being kept secret. I have always known, have known it most surely when I would not admit it to myself, that this would one day happen. I am not going back to Devil's Island. My wife and daughter had neither knowledge of nor part in Rupert's death. Maurice to Mayenne. End of Chapter 6.